Oh, no, not at all. So no,
Okay.
it's totally because of technical problems last week. All right, so
Uh,
we're going to follow the format that we usually do with when we do our planetary thing, and we start with Valens, and then we kind of work our way up to Saunders and Lilly, who are 17th century. So Valens is second century to Saunders and Lilly. And here's what Valens has to say about Jupiter. So we've got the childbearing. So understanding, so Jupiter, once again, is the greater benefic. And also that Jupiter is the Lord of increase, is called the Lord of increase. And that will come up when we look at some of the later things too. It might even come up here. And so as a result, anything that you need to multiply is something you would look to Jupiter for. So you want to be fruitful and multiply when it comes to children, then that's where the childbearing thing comes from. Engendering, childbearing, desire and loves, which I think is interesting. Of course, this is Valens, and we get to see kind of how it kind of changes over time. Political ties. Now that'll be interesting to see if we see a little bit more of that, because once we get into the types of careers that Jupiter represents, we may see a little bit more of this. Acquaintance, friendships with great men. So Jupiter is the fat cat. Jupiter is the greater benefic. So there is and also remembering that Jupiter is in his joy in the 11th house. So the house of friends, but also the house that's called the good spirit, is the house that Jupiter, in which Jupiter rejoices. And so this connection of acquaintances and friendships with great men is a direct corollary to Jupiter as connected to the 11th house through joy. Prosperity, obviously, now we start to get into Jupiter as the Lord of substance. So we've talked about Jupiter as increase. We've talked about Jupiter as kind of now with this one here with acquaintance and friendship, we talk about Jupiter as kind of an embodiment of the good spirit. And then now we talk about Jupiter, and this prosperity, salaries, that stuff can all be connected to the 11th house of gain, right? When we look at the 11th house as gains, but it also connects to Jupiter as the Lord of substance, right? So prosperity and salaries, gifts, Jupiter is the giver. So that's why when we see often with people who have a strong, weak Jupiters, especially, they give too much, they can be doormats, people take advantage of them, they loan money to people who never pay it back. So the opposite of a positive Jupiter, where there's this abundance, that this largesse, there's this weak Jupiter that gives too much and doesn't have anything left for themselves. Let's see, an abundance of crops. So when we come to the term abundance, we're definitely talking about Jupiter. Here's Anne Louise. Poor Anne Louise, she was trying to get in last week, and I kept coming in and off, on and off, and on and off. Hey, Anne Louise, sorry about last week. She was the victim of the technical problems last week. She kept trying to connect, and I kept trying to connect, and it just wasn't working. Okay. So we're just starting, so we're just perfect timing. We're just kind of going into the whole thing. Let's see. All right, so let's see, justice offices. We're going to see that. So I think as we start to kind of move through the history of astrology, or through the trajectory of astrological thought, this idea of justice and offices and office holding and rank, authority over temples. Okay, so Jupiter. Remember when we were doing the 9th house, we realized that when we were really talking about the 9th house, we were talking about the sun as the indicator of religion and spirituality, not necessarily Jupiter. And what we saw when we looked at Jupiter was we saw that Jupiter was the obedient, Jupiter was the pious person who was obedient to the law. So Jupiter represented faith and piety and obedience to the law, as a result of which one is rewarded. And so there's the Jupiter aspect there too. And so as we start to kind of, when we get into the later things, we'll start to come in, hopefully I will be borne out, my statements will be borne out. Okay, so authority over temples, arbitrations, trusts, inheritance. So this is kind of an extension of this, like this arbitration, trust, inheritance, that's 8th house, right? But it's also an extension of substance. right, of the administration of substance. And so authority over temple. So if you're in charge of the arbitration or trust or the inheritance, then you're in charge of the laws of arbitration and trust and inheritance. So remember, we just went to justice and offices, right? And so there's an aspect of justice that is law abiding. And so we're actually going to look at some charts that are around law and justice. Okay, so arbitrations, trust, inheritance, brotherhood, fellowship, right? So of course, Jupiter being the greater benefic, and also rejoicing in the 11th house, which is the house of friendships. Beneficence makes sense. The secure possession of goods, back to substance, relief from troubles, release from bonds, right? So we like to see planets connected to Jupiter because that means relief from trouble, release from bonds, right? Bondage is Saturn, a release from bond is Jupiter. Freedom, Jupiter. Deposits and trust, money and stewardships, right? So it's having the abundance. So a good term for Jupiter is really based on balance here is kind of abundance. There's something abundant about Jupiter. There's something about how much he has, how much you get, right? About like once again, this term of largesse, this term of what is your allotment, or this great allotment that kind of comes with Jupiter. So Jupiter is a hot and dry planet, although he's considered kind of hot and moist. That should actually be hot and moist. I think that that's incorrect. So sorry about that. I wrote that wrong. Jupiter is a hot and moist planet, which is sanguine temperament, right? So it can't be hot and dry as choleric temperament. So I'm not gonna stop the screen share for now. I will change it after we finish this. But hot, it's a hot and moist. So please make note of that, which is the sanguine temperament. So sanguine temperament is temperate and moist. Jupiter and Venus are essentially the most sanguine of the planets. They are the most sanguine planets. Jupiter is, well, actually, this is wrong too. So I'm going to have to change it. Okay, I'm going to stop the screen share. Or actually, I'm going to come to this. I made some mistakes. So I have changed what I had because I was absolutely incorrect on more than one point. So one time, okay, but the other times, no. So Jupiter is hot and moist, of sanguine temperament. So it's kind of a good thing to, there's so many things to know, right? There's so many things to memorize, but temperament, as far as hot and moist, hot and dry, blah, 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 etc., those are important because let's say you've got a wonderful Mercury in Virgo in the 10th house, right? And Mercury has his own, I think he's what a cold, dry temperament naturally, and he's in a cold, dry sign, but Mercury has his own natural temperament. Let's say Mercury is, so if Mercury is in the 10th in Virgo, then he's ruler of the 10th, and he's also then probably ruler of the ascendant. Or no, he's ruler of the 7th. So, so that would, in some way, we'd think, okay, that looks good. That looks great. Mercury up there in the 10th, great. Now, and especially for marriage, I mean, Mercury in Virgo is not necessarily good for marriage, right? Because Mercury is always a child and doesn't grow up, so there can be problems and that kind of thing. However, as far as the essential dignity of Mercury, that's good. Now, when you put him with Mars or the Sun, who is hot and dry, all of a sudden that changes him, right? All of a sudden how he is going to act, especially, let's say you put Mars next to Mercury, and you put the Sun in the 7th house. Now, all of a sudden you've got hot and dry, you've got cholera in the 7th, and you've got the ruler of the 7th with cholera. We know that that's going to be an issue. We know hot and dry, right? It could be the same thing. Let's say the person really wants intimacy, but Mercury is in Gemini, right? Which is a hot and moist sign, right? And becomes sanguine. Then we know that there's going to be more difficult. You see what I'm saying? If we have an idea of who is what is the natural nature, it just continues to go back to what I always say. The more we know about, the more we astrologically know, the more we can say. And so we know that Jupiter is not just expansion, but he's hot and moist, which is a sanguine temperament. We know that he's the ether element, which means he's the fifth chakra, right? Which means he resides within the fifth chakra because that's where the ether element is, right? We know that he's fecundity and increase. We already saw that he represents fertility in children. He represents substance. He represents benefit through association, right? He represents knowledge of law, right? Because we saw the what was it, the inheritances and all of the other the statutes and everything. So his domiciles are Sagittarius and Pisces. His detriments are Gemini and Virgo. His exaltation is Cancer. His fall is Capricorn. And this is his daytime. Sagittarius is daytime masculine. Pisces is his nighttime feminine sign. Sagittarius would be the sign of his joy, right? So remembering that planets have two types of joys. They rejoice in houses, and they specific houses, and they rejoice in specific signs. Jupiter rejoices in the 11th house and in Sagittarius. Okay, Jupiter is prosperous. There's that term prosperous. We saw that earlier, hot and moist, airy, moderate. Ooh, there it says airy, but we know also that Jupiter is Akash, that he is spirit. Now there's air, and then there's Akash or ether or space. And so you can think of space as what all of the other four elements are contained within. Moderate, life-bringing, powerful and signifying children. Life-bringing because Jupiter, we're going to see that Jupiter represents the lifeblood. As a matter of fact, in Vedic astrology, Jupiter is given the concept of Jiva, of the Jivatma, which is like the life spark in the chart. Powerful and signifying children. Philosophy and teachers. So, maybe I'll look for some philosophers. So philosophers and teachers. Now that sounds interesting. That seems connected more to the 9th house of knowledge, right? Excuse me. But there we have it, and we will look for it. Explaining dreams, truth-telling, a giver of law. So explaining dreams, that's 9th house again. Truth-telling. Oh, Jupiter is truth, virtue and truth. A giver of law, a medical doctor. Ooh, that's interesting. Constant, a lover of women and pleasant to them, a solver of questions, a victor, generous, regal, powerful, rich, a patron, alert, merciful, happy, humorous, and clean. This is from Abu Mashar, and so is this. It's not going to be that much different. The nutritive soul and life and ensouled bodies. So there's that concept of Jivatma. Also children and the children of children and beauty. Now beauty also is connected to who? To Venus. And he signifies the wise and doctors of the law, doctors of the law, and just judges, and firmness and wisdom and intellect and the interpretation of dreams. So it looks like we're talking about law, justice, judgment, wisdom, intellect and wisdom. So the ability, the intelligence to make judgments, right? You would have to make judgments to interpret dreams. And the interpretation of dreams, truth and divine reverence, faith and teaching of the law, religion, and the veneration and fear of God. So the interpretation of dreams, truth, and divine reverence, faith and the teaching of the law, religion and the veneration and fear of God, charity, piety, also the unity of faith and its foresight and the fitness of morals and responsibility. Now, is it faith and teaching of the law, religion, and veneration and fear of God? Is it fair and teaching of charity, piety, also the unity of faith and its foresight? I think maybe not. I think it's faith and teaching of the law, religion, and the veneration and fear of God. So once again, intellect that needs further judgment. So there's the rational mind, which is Mercury, right? We've learned that already, right? And so that's the kind of raw intellect. But then Jupiter is the next level of judgment. So Jupiter is the next level of using the mind, of being able to interpret, of being able to create an exegesis or a hermeneutics, or to do divination. So it looks like Jupiter needs to be involved with astrologers, even, right? For some level, even though it doesn't mention astrology. Let's continue. Let's see. So, and then once again, what did I say? Teaching of the law of religion, veneration and fear of God. We were just talking about piety. He would be the pious person that would venerate and fear God, right? Charity. So Jupiter represents giving and charity, right? So whenever you're dealing with giving more than receiving, you're dealing with Jupiter. Also the unity of faith. So once again, Jupiter is the faithful servant, the faithful pious servant who believes in the upholds and believes the laws, and as a result reaps the reward, right? And he will be praiseworthy. Also the unity of faith and its foresight, and the fitness of morals and responsibility. So Jupiter is the pillar of the community. Church going or mosque going or temple going, gives money to all the right people, has the family, the right amount of children, follows, does all the Hindu rites correctly, or all the, or prays to Mecca at all the right time, does all of the tithing or whatever else, right? So Jupiter is, whenever you go to church or you go to mosque or you go to temple, you're surrounded by Jupiter. Right? The temple itself is probably more sun, right? Because we're actually dealing with God. It's a house of God or a place of God. But everybody around you is participating in Jupiter, where they are expressing their virtue, their religious virtue, expressing their veneration of God, their fear of God, giving to causes. There's that. I'm thinking about Hinduism where there's prasad. I'm thinking about Catholicism where there are soup kitchens, there are food banks or soup kitchens. Or where you can get biryani at many different mosques. Free food. People will feed you for free at mosques. So all of that stuff that's connected with how we express our faith is Jupiter, right? Because faith is there to make us, religious faith is there to make us better people, right? To make us act in better ways, more moral, more responsible ways, to be more praiseworthy, right? So that's something that's kind of new for me in thinking about things, or in being able to really separate what I think is happening. So, right, so when we go to church, when we as churchgoers or mosque goers or temple goers are entering into embodying Jupiter, where we are embodying Jupiter in order to participate with the sun in his ninth house environment, right? And that's the best that we can, highest that we can achieve, right? Jupiter is the highest good, the greatest benefic, right? So going into this ninth house sun thing brings us to our highest good. And so we enter into that as we go into the sun. So this is the connection between, or the difference between, the connection and the difference between the sun and Jupiter, and how they are connected to spirituality. So yes, Jupiter is connected to spirituality in that Jupiter is the one that discerns what the law is, interprets how to act in response, and then creates a system of moral behavior based on the law, based on whatever that law is, right? So you become a Hare Krishna, then Jupiter becomes the best Hare Krishna. You become a Hindu, Jupiter becomes a Vaishnavite, Jupiter becomes the best worshiper of Vishnu, or Shaivite, best worshiper of Shiva, or the best Muslim, right? So it's to be the best, but that's not necessarily, the thing is that we want to be the best and most pious in our religious area in order to be the best person. And so there's another aspect of in my opinion, of negative Jupiter is false piety. Is you can pretend that you can follow all the rules and do all the right things. And I know we all know people like this, but be a viper inside, right? Be completely evil. And you see this all, well, I mean, almost the entire white evangelical Christian community is that, all following everything to the letter, but the most, demonic, horrible, evil people that you would ever meet. So that's not real Jupiter, right? Real Jupiter is true, kind of true, sincere faith that then informs activity and actions, and behavior. Observance of patience and perhaps inconstancy will befall him in hastiness and lack of foresight after being prudent. And so prudence, patience, blessedness, charity, piety, attainment of victory against one who seeks him, and respect and a kingdom, also the king and rich nobles and magnates, and good luck and hope and joy, right? Good luck, hope and joy, passionate desire for assets. Okay, so this is substance, collection of assets, enrichment, also good condition and aptitude, and enrichment and security in every matter. There we go, as Jupiter is once again ruler of substance. Excuse me, and the goodness of the moral habits of the mind, and the largesse of charity. And okay, so once again, we come back to not just working at the mundane, the mind working at the mundane level of what is that? That is a cat, but it's more so cat implies what? Cat implies feral, cat implies whatever, cat implies I saw a cat. We talked about cats in the Bible on Saturday. You know what I'm saying? That's where Jupiter comes in, right? So Mercury says, oh, look, there's a cat. Jupiter says, oh, I saw a cat. We talked about cats, and I saw a cat in my dream, and it was the exact same color, and blah, blah, blah. And wait, that must mean that there we go into Jupiter. So when we go into mental speculation, right? When we go into projection, when we go into imagining. Now, interestingly enough, Saturn, I've seen often connected with imagination. It's connected with profundity. But Jupiter, from what we, Jupiter and expansiveness. Now, notice that they haven't used, like, there is a term for expansion, to contract and to expand. And there is a term for an expansion of something, right? But notice that we don't really see that. We don't really see this focus on expansion. We see a focus on virtue. We see a focus on morality. We see a focus on conformity to the law. We see a focus on, well, even having children is a way of conforming to the law, right? If you're Indian, if you're any country, to be honest with you, anywhere, having children is a way to conform to the law. That's one of the things that you do. You get married, you have children, boom, 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 right? So even that in and of itself is a way of kind of fitting in with the laws. But then it's kind of good behavior, patience, charity, piety, moral and responsible, using foresight. So there's kind of there's a wisdom involved, judgment, use of judgment. Let's come back. Bragging and the sharpness of mind, comprehension and goodness, charity and generosity, largesse, there's that word, the largesse of charity and generosity, true esteem and the esteemment of authority over the citizens of cities, and the esteem of powerful men and magnates. There we go back with this 11th house, embodiment of good spirit. Jupiter is the embodiment of good spirit, which means connection, benefit through connections, through good connections, and his bending down to them, and the assistance of men in matters. And he signifies a love of building and deluxe flourishing residences, and compassion for people, and vision, compassion, that's another Jupiter thing, and vision in matters, right? So vision, far seeing, what are the foresight, vision, right? So we're getting a totally different picture of Jupiter but it is all working out to be mostly mental, and it makes sense when we think of Jupiter being sanguine, right? The sanguine signs, Gemini, Libra, Aquarius, those are all the human signs. Those are all the highly verbal. They're known for having attractive voices. They're known for being eloquent and good with words, etc. And so the sanguine temperament is known for, instead of reacting, it might say something interesting or say something funny or whatever. And also known for being temperate, known for being able to hold their temper. Also, the joy and laughter and a multitude of speaking and the keenness of the tongue. Right? What did I just say, right? Oh, wait, even before that, bliss and knowledge, the fulfillment of promises, generosity, joking, banter, beauty, decoration, form. Now that kind of, it starts to morph into where we think about Venus, joking and banter and beauty, excuse me, decoration and form. But we can see that Venus and Jupiter, remember the saying is that Venus and Jupiter are benefics because Venus gives benefit through pleasure and Jupiter through increase. So when we come to it, they're really their areas or arenas are overlapping, which is why we tend to see, in my opinion, issues and problems when we have Venus conjunctions, Venus-Jupiter conjunctions or squares or oppositions or things like that, because then we get to see how too much of a good thing, too much of what we enjoy, right? Pleasure and increases, it's increased the pleasure. And so the motivation becomes to increase the pleasure at all costs. Okay, whatever is joined to him, he is grateful for. And he signifies a multitude of sexual intercourse, see, overlapping with Venus, and the esteem of the good and hatred of evil, and making things right between people, and the commanding of what is known and the prohibiting of what is reprehensible. So it does have to do with enjoyment and pleasure. There's an overlapping of beauty and pleasure and enjoyment and sexual pleasure and attracted to things that are beautiful. All of that Venus stuff, it's almost as if he kind of takes her under his wing and she's involved with him. Al-Kabizi, significator of assets, and he works temperate, heat, and moisture, right? We talked about that. Sanguine, youth up to the completion of that age, and of masteries, those which pertain to the law. We're going to get to that, like to judge just judgments, right? So we've just been talking about this connection with Jupiter and judgment, right? So there's Mercury and the rational mind, but then there's Jupiter and how well we're able to make judgments. What is the ability of us to make judgment, the nature of our decision making and the judgments, the discernment that we have, etc. It's that next level of sophistication in the use of our mind. And to produce peace between men and to study good things. And he signifies an abundance of assets, we were already there, and of business matters, those which come to be without seduction. Oh, that might be Venus. And he signifies the soul and life, right? We were talking about Jivatma, happiness and truth, religion and patience, and every beautiful and valuable precept. So he didn't actually list it out. He basically just said, hey, all of the virtues and an abundance of sexual intercourse. So Jupiter likes to fuck. Now, Jupiter rules what sign? Pisces, which is what? The exaltation of Venus. So I think we can see where that's kind of coming from. But we also see that Jupiter also, maybe the Jupiter kind of abundance of sexual intercourse happens only in the wedding chamber, right? Doesn't, maybe they don't, we know that isn't the case, mind you, but if we're looking at the absolute highest version of Jupiter, then we could say the horny husband, right? The horniest husband has eyes only for the wife, but they're always at it. Right, so that might be a Jupiterian thing where he's not into infidelity. He doesn't look at any other woman. He would never transgress, but he and the wife indulge all the time. Here is Benati, benefic, masculine, diurnal, and is a natural significator of substance because substance is the second accident which happens to a native after his emergence. Now, this is going into connection with the Chaldean order. The Chaldean order. So starting with Saturn, and the first accident that happens to the native is form, is they're brought into physical form, and that's Saturn with the first house. And so remembering that instead of using the zodiac alphabet, we use the Chaldean order, Saturn for first house, Jupiter for second house. Jupiter is the natural significator for substance. Mars for third house, he's the natural significator of brothers. Sun for fourth, natural significator of father. Venus for fifth, she's one of the significators for children, but also for sexual pleasure, all kinds of pleasure. Mars for sixth. Mercury for sixth. Mercury is the ruler of servants, and sixth house is house of servants. And then Moon for seventh. Moon is the ruler of women, right? And most people getting their charts read were men. And it continues with Saturn again. So Saturn is death, Jupiter is wisdom, right? Ninth house. Mars is action, right? The 10th house are the works by which we're known. Sun is the 11th house, so that kind of represents the fame that can come to us. Venus is the 12th house, right? What we do in private, right? So that's how we can see the Chaldean order in connection to each house. All right, and so that's why Jupiter is the second planet, because in the order of the planets, he is the first after Saturn. And Jupiter is likewise the second planet who exercises his own operation in a conceived child, namely by bestowing spirit and life to it. Jivatma again. So this concept of this spark of life, this Jivatma, is basically Jupiter, is considered. So this comes from India. That comes directly from India. And it kind of ended up kind of continuing. This is by this time we're in the 9th century, maybe. So now we get to the matter. What type of person? Now we've gotten a really good idea of the type of person, really. If anything, we've gotten more of an idea of what kind of person is Jupiter than what Jupiter himself will do. Wouldn't you say? So planet of wisdom and intellect and vision, right? Makes perfect sense. Now, those are all things that concentrate on the human mind, right? So we're talking about Jupiter in specific connection to the human mind here. We're getting anthropocentric, right? He's a planet of wisdom, intellect, and vision. So that's, first of all, is that Jupiter has a major effect on the mind. And it has a what's the word, a complex, it has a complexing, what's the word? What's the word for making something more complex? It has a, I don't know, it has a, basically it makes the mind more complex and sophisticated. If Saturn is complected to him, it signifies black magic and incantations. So so now we're looking at where is the mind turning to? What is the mind, what was it? The usage or the application. Here we go. What is the Jupiter? What are they applying their Jupiter to? Wisdom, intellect, and vision, right? So what are they applying that wisdom, intellect, and vision to? If it's Saturn, it's black magic, incantations, and exorcisms. Mars, it's to medicine. So when we were looking at medicine, did we see Mars, Jupiter things? We saw Jupiter in Scorpio, didn't we? We saw Jupiter in Scorpio quite a bit with those surgeons, didn't we? And we saw Mars, Jupiter related things. We saw Jupiter related with nurses. We saw Moon Jupiter with nurses. And we saw Jupiter in Scorpio with quite a few surgeons. And if Mars is complected to him, it signifies science and medicine. So something else to look at. Sun with him, knowledge of sex and prudence and contentions and disputations. Venus, composition of sounds and other delightful sciences, okay. Mercury, science, signifies the knowledge of arithmetic and writing, also astronomy, philosophy, and geometry. And I know that Layla and I both have Mercury-Jupiter contacts, and Layla's a math nerd, and we're both really into astrology. And if the moon is complected to him, it signifies knowledge of the disposition of waters and their measure, and also that of lands. And in terms, so what do they turn their wisdom, intellect, and vision towards? And in terms of the quality of mind, signifies generosity and modesty and justice. So that's interesting. So the largesse, the expansion, so to speak, that we hear about, this concept of expansion is maybe too limited, too limited for the concept of Jupiter, or really maybe even irrelevant. Now we know that we're not necessarily irrelevant, because we do know that Jupiter enlarges what he touches. We do know that, right? So Jupiter makes things bigger. If it's a problem, he can make the problem bigger. If it's a good thing, he can make the good thing. He can make the good thing increase, right? So maybe the better word is increase as opposed to expand. Okay, here's Benatti. Well disposed Oriental in an angle, the native will be of good quality, benign, just, honor old men, good to their elders, be of sound advisor, helper to those in need. There's the charity, of good fame, love his friends. Up there's that 11th house part. Have a good intellect. Let's see if he says it now. Looking if he's unfortunate. Let's see if he says anything about false piety. Inexperienced in doing well, turning towards devilish operations, eager under a certain type of pretended sanctity. Bam. He will stay in the houses of prayer, will willingly live solitarily in crypts and cavernous places and caves, and on that occasion he will predict future things. He will not esteem anyone. So here, now this is interesting. So there is a pretended sanctity, bam, that's the end of that. But then the next part of it is that the sanctity isn't pretend, but there isn't an interest in the fellowship of men. Willingly live solitarily and in crypts and cavernous places and caves, and that on occasion he will predict future things, right? He will not esteem anyone, he will have no friends. So this is the opposite of Jupiter as good spirit, as 11th house with friends and associations that benefit him. And now here's the thing. I am Jupiter in Gemini retrograde, and I am definitely very much kind of monastic and live solitarily, and have always lived in, have been interested in living in caves and things of that nature. And so it's very interesting, but this kind of really separates what the Jupiter temperament is about. The Jupiter temperament is really a kind of a conformist based on this old way. He's really kind of the conformist. He's really the one who has no problem. He's the cishet guy, the cishet white guy who, with 2 children, who can't understand how anybody can be trans. Right? Nothing's wrong. Everything's right with his life. He goes to church. He believes in God. He doesn't just go to church and believe in God. He tries to live by the precepts that he believes in. He's straight. He's never strayed. He loves his wife. He has lots of sex with his wife. Would never touch another woman. Would never do any kind of fornication, homosexual activity. Doesn't look at porn. That's Jupiter. Goody fucking 2 shoes. Isn't that interesting? But we know better, right? We know that that's not the full picture of Jupiter. We know that that's not the full picture of Jupiter, right? So we know that at the very best, or rather in this worldview, right? This 13th century worldview, 8th, 9th, 10th century, 13th century worldview, where religion is such an important thing, right? And especially remember that Bonatti was living in Spain because he could not practice astrology in Italy. Because of religious considerations, right? So religion really was the law of the land. And so that meant to really be Jupiter, to really be good, you really had to be following the law of the land, which was the religious law. You could not be a heretic, right? Remember, who's the ruler of dissent and heresy? Mars. So Jupiter, there's this, like I say, there's this goody 2-shoe aspect to Jupiter, because remember, Jupiter, as the process of expansion, Jupiter is really the line crosser, right? When we think of Jupiter as the ruler of Sagittarius, and when we think of Sagittarius, we think about, one, the arrow, right? And how the arrow is going from one place to another. But also we think of travel. I remember my first few times coming up here to Cancun from Tulum, I always was under the largesse of a good friend of mine who showed me around and helped me to find everything that I needed, and I would be with him for the entire day. And that was great, but I never ended up learning the town. I never ended up kind of feeling like I knew what was going on. I knew my bearings. So I came up one day when he wasn't in town, and I ended up completely getting my bearings, and it was the most Jupiterian feeling. And it's the connection between Jupiter and dominion. Jupiter taking dominion over the unfamiliar, right? Making the unfamiliar familiar. And think about how Spain was given the Sagittarius zodiac sign, because Spain were the people who discovered the New World. And so Spain took on this Jupiterian hue from the 14th century, Portugal too, from the 14th, 15th century. Spain took on this Sagittarian hue because they were the explorers, right? So remember, the quality of vision and the quality of foresight and the quality of exploration belongs to Jupiter. right? So maybe if we saw by house what Jupiter is connected to, if Jupiter is connected to the ruler of the ninth, then there's going to be an interest in foreign matters and travel, maybe, or Jupiter and Mars, because remember Mars was the ruler of pilgrimage, right? So that could be a connection with that as well. Anyway, so we've looked at Jupiter manner with Benatti. Let's see if there's anything else. And have no friends, abhor children, right? So all of the things that Jupiter represents, he will be the opposite. He'll have no friends, abhor children. With men, he will flee conversation. So once again, so the fellowship of men, the fellowship between people. Jupiter is fellowship, is good fellowship between people, and so the opposite of a good Jupiter is negative. So Jupiter is really social. What we're seeing is almost everything that we're looking at with Jupiter is part of the social hierarchy, it's part of the social connected to the social contract. Those skilled. So now we come into the Jupiter manner, but so it tells us what kind of people, what kind of positions you'll see, but then it also tells us what kind of person: honorable, benevolent, freeborn, faithful, gentle, pious, truthful. Schörner is from the 16th century. Magnanimous and religious persons. Religious, see, magnanimous and religious. Magnanimous is charitable, religious, pious. There we go. Once again, pious, faithful, gentle, patient, compassionate, magnanimous. Right? We're getting an idea of who Jupiter really is in this perception. We're now we're looking at this personification of Jupiter as good spirit. Right? So when Jupiter shows up as good spirit, think about bosses you've hated and bosses you've loved. That's Jupiter versus Saturn or Mars as good spirit, right? So that's Jupiter as the 11th house ruler or good spirit, and that's Mars or Saturn. Let's say you have the micromanaging, critical, cold as ice, never showed any mercy kind of boss. There's your there's your Saturn version. It's not good spirit, it's bad spirit. You had the boss that was super benevolent, always made things as easy, chucked in whenever things were necessary, was lenient when things were needed, but also made sure you got your work done, treated you with respect, didn't write you up for stupid things, or things that were undeniable or negligible, right? So think about the opposite between what the Jupiter manner is. Jupiter manner gives you the space to express. The Saturn manner can restrict your expression, right? So there's once again this concept of Jupiter and dominion. Jupiter hands over dominion. There's an aspect of dominion connected to it. We're going to come to this later, but those skilled in law, bishops, prelates, nobles, upright. So notice that when we talked about Mercury, we saw lawyers in there, advocates, litigators, right? So people that use their tongue, right, for it. But really, when it comes to people, let me go back for a second. When he talks about those skilled in law, which of course is a lawyer, but also obviously a judge, right? And we've already been talking about judges and judgment, discernment, wisdom, foresight. So this is judges. There we go. Upright persons, judges, right? Once again, the pillar of the community is Jupiter. Just change to Venus hour. Okay, and so then with Lily, and it looks like we're not going to get too far away. Magnanimous, faithful, bashful, aspiring in honorable way in high matters, in all his actions, a lover of fair dealing, so fair, desiring to benefit all men, wanting to benefit all, doing glorious things, honorable and religious. So once again, religious, following the precepts of religion, sweet and affable conversation. And so once again, the enjoyable congress of people, the enjoyable fellowship of men, or enjoyable fellowship of people, wonderfully indulgent to wife and children, reverencing age. So the indulgence, once again, if you have the good boss, they're often somewhat indulgent. Reverencing age, okay, so good to their elders. Once again, reverencing aged men, good to their elders. Jupiter is good to their elders. A great reliever of the poor, right? There's the charity, full of charity and godliness. There's the piety, liberal, hating all sordid actions, just, wise, prudent, thankful, virtuous, so that when you find Jupiter, the significator of any man in the question, or lord of the ascendant and nativity, and well dignified, you may judge him qualified as above said. So Jupiter, unfortunate, wastes his patrimony, so a spendthrift, right? Because Jupiter is the positive Jupiter is the collects substance or increases substance. Suffers everyone to cozen him. I guess, so instead of taking care of others, right? Instead of being there for others, is selfish and wants others to, is hypocritically religious. There we go. Remember, I was asking about that. Tenacious and stiff in maintaining false tenets. There we go. In religion, is ignorant, careless, nothing delightful, so doesn't care about learning things, right? So Jupiter, remember, is the expanse of thinking and the more sophisticated form of thinking. And the expanding on regular thinking. There's expansion for Jupiter. Dull capacity, delightful, nothing delightful in the love of his friends. So negative Jupiter is not good with others. So that's something I'm learning. That's something interesting. So negative Jupiter can have problems dealing with others because they don't want to be in the company of others. Basing himself in all companies, crouching and stooping where no necessity is. Right? Okay. So Jupiter body. So we tend to forget the stuff about the coloring. Unequal and short nostrils, bald, having blackness in one of his teeth, a beautiful stature, good mind, good manners, a beautiful body, big eyes, wide pupils, and curly beard. Round beard, beautiful eyes, two larger teeth in front of the rest, and sometimes to a little extent different ones. In the face of this man, a golden color, okay, the thing with the color, gladly wearing beautiful clothing, having hair on the head, sometimes long and beautiful, in condition of religious men, looks at the ground while walking. That's interesting. So I have Jupiter, I think what Layla and I are both Sag rising, so that's interesting. And I do look at the ground when I walk. Upright, straight, and tall, and that's what I've tended to notice. Layla too. Upright, straight, and tall, brown, ruddy, and lovely complexion of oval and long visage. It looks like large eyes or kind of attractive eyes seem to go with the Jupiter body. Sag too. Are you Sag rising too? You are. That's right, because Leo. That's right. All that Leo stuff is in the 9th or late 8th or early 9th house. Kind of auburn brown, much beard, a large deep belly, right? Because think of what the picture of Jupiter was, from Rome, from Greece and Rome. It was, kind of the big bodied man with the kind of big belly. Or if you've ever seen a movie called A Christmas Carol, the ghost of Christmas Present is Jupiter, right? So if you've ever seen that, but it's he shows up with the horn of a cornucopia of plenty and this huge banquet. And he's got this wreath around his head. He's wearing this purple robe, and he's kind of big, got a big beard. It's totally Jupiter. And here Lily mentions if Jupiter is Oriental versus if Jupiter is Occidental, and it mostly looks like it's around coloring. So the Jupiter profession, here's Schoner, office inspiration, the nourishment of law, prudence and judgment, preferment, royal power, principle. So it looks like it's going to be advisors, it's going to be lawyers and judges. So maybe not necessarily a litigator, not necessarily somebody who's in court and litigating things in court who has to create an argument, but more like someone who has to know laws specifically. So even a tax lawyer on some extent would, any other kind of law where you're not in the court. I'm working right now for a securities lawyer. And so he mostly just deals with the formation of entities and getting people involved with the right regulational authority. But as a result, that's Jupiter. He has to know the law. He has to know the aspects of the law. Lily says signifies judges, senators, counselors. Okay, so now we're coming into politicians. Judges, senators, counselors, ecclesiastical men, bishops, priests, ministers, cardinals, chancellors, doctors of the civil law, young scholars and students in the university or college. Isn't that interesting? Lawyers, clothiers, woolen drapers. Now remember that when we were looking at the 9th house, that we saw that the 9th house represented all teachers and all students. And so here we have scholars and students in a university or college, right, for Jupiter, right? Doctors of the civil law. Right. So so we're definitely needing to be looking at judges and lawyers aside from litigators. Most of the lawyers that we tend to understand the most are people who go to court and who argue things in court. But we're dealing now with lawyers who don't necessarily do that. And so there's a difference between a litigator and an attorney. And so I guess many attorneys might fall under this Jupiterian profession. The Jupiterian body parts are thighs and the feet. This is valence. Of the internal parts, the sperm, the uterus, the liver, the parts of the right side. Now that all changed, right? Because the sperm and the uterus was given to Venus. Jupiter continued to have the liver, and he continued in some areas to have the side. Let's see what happens when we move. Liver and stomach, and the left ear, and the arms and belly, also the lower part of the navel or the pubic area and the intestines. So here he's being given much of the viscera, but definitely the liver. And now in some later ones he's given the lungs too. So he's given the liver and the biggest organ, obviously our largest organ is our skin, but the liver is one of the largest organs in there, and so it had to do with the size of the liver. But in some also the lungs, because the lungs are also quite large. Concave and valence said that he signifies the liver, the stomach, okay, liver and stomach, the left ear, the arms, and the belly. So once again, so the belly and the navel, and the lower parts of the pubic region, and he signifies the intestines. So now we're with Benatti, so it's getting codified, right? So it's he's gotten all of the information, and it's getting codified in this 13th century source. So it's definitely liver and stomach, left ear, arms, belly, lower parts of the pubic region, and the intestine. Now we're going to go to Scherner. There, lungs, see? Ribs, cartilage, liver, pulse, semen, arteries, the left ear and their infirmities, consumption, apoplexy, pleurisy, diseases of the blood. See, because I always heard that, Jupiter represented the blood. Angina, convulsions, heartburn, numbness. When we get to Saunders and the diseases, we'll see if any of these show up. But look at how lungs, now this is 16th century now, lungs and ribs and cartilage have now been added. Liver, pulse, semen, that we saw semen earlier with valence. The left ear has been a constant, right? Arteries, we didn't see that before. Let's see what happens when we get to Saunders. The liver, the lungs, the semen, the ribs, the sides, the veins, the arteries, the griffles. I wonder what those are. Navel, muscles, pulse, and the forefinger of the hand. Okay, so there's Saunders. We're now in the 17th century. Liver and lungs and the semen. So sharing that with Venus. Ribs and sides, the veins and the arteries, the navel. So it looks like the lower part of the stomach and the navel. Muscles. It's giving him the muscles. The pulse and the forefinger of the hand. And of infirmities, he signifies whatever is increased blood, right? Because once again, Jupiter is the lifeblood, and of an increase, which is not, see, isn't that interesting that none of these mention blood, but whenever they talk about infirmities, they say whatever is increased blood, whatever has to deal with problems with the blood. Increased blood by means of an increase, which is not excessive, so that he would not exterminate nature, because of course he's a benefic, so we're hoping that he wouldn't kill, nor of inflamed or convertible blood. And he is a planet of wisdom, intellect, and good work. Jupiter in the mind. Chronic diseases, inflammation of the lungs, heat of the liver, convulsions. Okay, so convulsions we saw earlier with Scherner. Apostemations, phlegmons, I don't know, oh, phlegm. Okay, so phlegmons are phlegm. Itch, ringworms, apoplexy, arthritis, headache, and proceeding of blood. Headache proceeding of blood, spitting of blood, passions of backbone, swelling and inflammations proceeding of blood. So lots of blood-related things. Acute diseases. If he's the morbificant, so if a planet is morbificant, it's the planet that creates the disease. He signifies such as proceed of blood, as pleurisy. So pleurisy is problems with the side. Remember, he represented the sides. Parapneumonia, squinosis, inflammations, pox, measles, plague, continual fevers, okay, distempers of the liver. So, all right, so it looks like we've got a pretty good sense of what's going on with him. It's blood-related issues, it's liver-related issues, it's lung-related issues, it's issues that have to do with arteries and joints, like arthritis, also things that have to do with the side or the rib cage, because pleurisy can affect the ribs. I don't see anything about the cartilage, but notice there is a mention of the pulse. Heart cramps, pain in the backbone. So backbone connected to the side, all diseases lying in the veins or ribs and proceeding from corruption of blood. Okay, so at this point, once we get into the 17th century, he's being given the veins and the ribs, and then any kind of disease that has to do with the corruption of blood is his. All infirmities in the liver, left ear, apoplexies, inflammations of the lungs, palpitations and trembling of the heart. Okay, that's interesting. Cramps. Cramps is in Saunders. Excuse me, pain in the backbone. Excuse me. God, I've been having such allergic reactions. I think it's the weather's changing. It's been getting really hot. All diseases lying in the veins or ribs, proceeding from a corruption of blood. So pretty much exactly what Saunders said. Squinsies, I'm not sure. Windiness, all putrefaction of the blood. Fevers proceeding from too great abundance thereof. All right, so we get a good idea now of where the Jupiter parts of the body are and what the diseases are. We now come to the flavor. This is just that little chart that shows you every planet and its flavor. Jupiter rules the sweet. So you see Jupiter in the second house, you see Jupiter as ruler of the second house, you may have an issue of a person who has a sweet tooth, right? Because the second house is the food we eat. And savors and colors, sweet or well-scented odors, or that odor which in smell is no way extreme or offensive, kind of similar to Venus. Sea green or blue, purple, ash color, a mixed yellow and green. So those are the colors you can use for him. So if you're doing any kind of working with Jupiter, you can use these colors for your candle or for your altar cloth. And here are his herbs and drugs. Cloves and clove sugar, mace, nutmeg, strawberry, flax, lungwort, excuse me, oregano and marjoram, rhubarb, wheat. And I'm allergic to wheat, how funny. And I've got that pomegranates, I love them, basil, licorice, peony, saffron, daisy. Okay, so these are all of the herbs, violets. And here we have a few, the lungwort, the comfrey, the self-heal, the peony, the feversen, and a few other things here. So he rules sheep, the heart. The heart is a young deer, or stag, the doe, the ox, elephant, dragon, tiger, unicorn. Those beasts which are mild and gentle, and yet of great benefit to mankind are appropriate to him. And he's got the stork, the lark, the eagle. Jupiter has the eagle. The partridge, bees. Because bees help things to proliferate. Bees help to fertilize things. The pheasant, the peacock, the hen. The dolphin, the whale, the serpent, sheepfish or river whale. And his places, altars and churches and public conventions, synods, convocations, and places neat. See, so he likes altars of churches. Now notice it's not the place of the church. He delights in or near altars of churches, right? So he likes to be by the pulpit. So that would be a preacher, right? That would be a deacon. That would be a bishop. That'd be a lector, you know, whoever they ask to come up and read from the scripture, right? So near the altar. He likes to be near the altar. That's interesting. He doesn't, it's not the place of the church itself. It's the altar he likes. Public conventions, synods, convocations, right? This is the Congress of people all together. And places neat, sweet, in wardrobes, courts of justice, oratories. So you have jury duty, you're going into a Jupiter environment, right? So Jupiter has one lot. It's called the lot of victory. And it's taken from, isn't it taken from the lot of things? Okay, so it's taken from the part of spirit to Jupiter by day, and from Jupiter to the part of spirit by night. And we'll look at that in a chart when we see it. And its signification is over honor and achievement and assistance and blessedness and kindness, also praiseworthy ends and fitness and seekings of faith and of whatever is of its being, and belief in God. And so right at this point, we can list it off. It's all going to be the same stuff that we've learned. Now, interestingly enough, this is not from Bonatti. This is from Al-Khabizi. This is from the 9th century. So all the stuff that with that Bonatti book that I've given you, almost all of the stuff in Bonatti's book is from here. And you can see it's all from either the Abu Mashar abbreviation, or a great introduction of Abu Mashar, or the Al-Khabizi introduction. How the blessedness and triumph and victory is taken, but how it's taken to what it's taken to. And all of the things: belief in God, studying every good work and the esteeming of it, the seeking of justice and of a just judgment between men, the building of places of oratory, and the wisdom and the wise and the loftiness of the wise. Also trust and hope in everything a man enjoys in terms of good, right? All Jupiter. Oh, we're done. Stop that for a second. Let's shift. How do we calculate this? I'm going to show you right now. Okay. What I thought I would do is, let's look at Clarence Thomas. Now, Clarence Thomas is a Supreme Court justice right now, and he is the only African-American on the court. And not only is he the only African-American, he's African-American and he's conservative. He was installed in the 90s, and actually our current president has quite a bit to do with him being installed, because he was in charge of the Judiciary Committee at the time, or he was part of the Judiciary Committee, and this man, Clarence Thomas, was accused of sexually harassing one of his staff, a woman by the name of Anita Hill. And Anita Hill became basically the trial of Anita Hill. And she became basically re-victimized by Joe Biden and the Senate Judiciary Committee. And Clarence Thomas was passed, and was, what's the word? It's not chosen, but he was, approved to become the Supreme Court justice. And this past January 6th, his wife was one of the people involved in the insurrection. So, but we have a justice. We have a person who is a justice. So what's going on with Jupiter? Well, one of the interesting things that we see is that Jupiter is in the 11th house in his own sign. So that makes good sense, right? Jupiter is kind of the main thing that represents justice. So, let's look for this part. So how do we find the part of victory, or the part of justice? So to find the part of justice, we look to see if it's a day chart or a night chart. It's a nighttime chart. And if it were daytime, we would take the part of spirit, not the part of fortune, but the part of spirit to the position of Jupiter, and take that distance, or vice versa if it's nighttime. So let's find the part of spirit. So right now the sun is at 2 degrees of Cancer, the moon is at 1 degree of Aquarius. That's 150 degrees plus 1. And as you can see, that gives us part of fortune. If we go forward from moon to sun, that gives us a part of fortune at 26 degrees or in the 27th degree of Gemini. Now, if we go backwards, then we can go back 150 and back 450 and back another 1 degree. So go back 150 takes us to 26 degrees of Leo, and back another degree takes us to 25 degrees of Leo. Okay, so this person's part of spirit. So those are the two most important parts, if you remember from when we talked about parts ages ago, right? The part of fortune and the part of spirit have precedence over both. And the part of fortune is called the ascendant of the moon, and the part of spirit is called the ascendant of the sun, or the part of the sun. So be remembering that. And also another term for the part of spirit, you saw in this one that some of them were calling it the part of things that are absent, but another term for it is called futurorum, or the part of future things or things to come. So it's the part of things that we can't see yet, but may come to pass in the future. So it's at 25 degrees of Leo, so it's nighttime, which means we're going to take Jupiter to the part of spirit. So we're going to go back 120 and go forward 3. So go back 120 for this, brings us to 26 degrees of Virgo, and forward 3 brings us to 29 degrees of Virgo. So the part of victory, or the part of Jupiter in this particular class, in this particular thing, is Jupiter, is Virgo ruled by Mercury. Now, isn't it interesting that the part of Jupiter is in a Mercury sign, right? Mercury is the scribe, rules the tongue, rules the hands, and the hands, and all of those other things, and the conscious mind, and he is the litigator and the advocate, etc., right? And is the one who creates the arguments. And remember, of course, every judge has to basically kind of state their argument when they say yay or nay, right? Their opinion. They have to basically write their opinion. And that we have the Mars here, and the ruler of the 10th is on the part of Jupiter, right? So that's one interesting thing. So the ruler, and that this is the natural 9th house. The Virgo is the natural 9th house, even though it's not the cusp of the 9th. Virgo would be the natural 9th house of this chart if we were looking at it from a whole sign standpoint. So that's interesting, and it brings us to Mercury. Let's see what's going on with Mercury. We've got Mercury and Venus together, which doesn't necessarily say, and look also with the sun. So we got the Sun, Mercury, Venus thing, this little cluster, and that sun is ruling the 8th house. Mercury is also, and also with the 9th. So once again, kind of connecting us with the 9th, the sun with Mercury, with who's the ruler of the ascendant? Saturn. And sun is ruling and oh, look at that. Oh, and remember that the Saturn was on the spirit, right? So the part of spirit was Leo, right? Was 25 Leo, and the Saturn Pluto is on that. So we've got the ruler of the ascendant on the part of spirit, right? So on the things to come. Then the ruler of the part of spirit is the sun, and the sun is with Mercury, who is already kind of a lawyer, and Venus. Now Mercury Venus is usually some kind of acting, or entertainment, or acting or entertainment or dancing or things of that nature. But notice it's in Cancer, and look at the moon in Aquarius. So that doesn't necessarily really kind of point quite so much to an entertainment career. And also in the 6th house, this person's not interested in going into entertainment or singing and dancing or anything like that. It looks like it's really interested in kind of setting up its security. And so is this moon, very, very interested in security. The Saturn is in Leo. So this person wants security and power. Right. So the Saturn on the part of spirit, the ruler of the part of fortune with the spirit. Oh, we've got fortune and spirit together. So ruler of the part of fortune is Mercury. Ruler of the part of spirit is the sun. They're together with the ruler of the 9th. And we know the 9th house can also represent, and look, it's Libra, right, which is the scales of justice. Is there any connection between some of these? Well, look at how the Jupiter is applying to the trine of the Saturn, who is the ruler of the ascendant. The Jupiter is also opposing the part of fortune, right? So we've got a connection with that. We don't have a connection with Jupiter in the ninth house necessarily, although we might. Not necessarily. No, not necessarily. We don't have a connection with Jupiter in the ninth house, but we've got it with the part of fortune, and we've got it with the ruler of the ascendant. Okay, so that might, and also the fact that Capricorn is rising. This person, Moon is in Aquarius. This person would probably be quite conservative, and also maybe quite starstruck. Quite struck. Oh, and also notice, the ruler of the seventh is in the first. I've always felt that Clarence Thomas's wife was actually his handler, that she's actually really in charge of everything. That he's basically like we call it a token in the United States. He's basically a token that was put in there to basically vote the way that the Republicans wanted him to all the time, but make it look as though they're inclusive. And it looks as though his wife has been controlling every aspect of his life. And like I said, I call her his handler, and this actually fits the bill quite well. Okay, so that's Clarence Thomas. We see that there is a Jupiterian connection. There's a ninth house connection with the ruler of the ruler of the part of fortune and the ruler of the part of spirit. We see that there is also a connection between Jupiter and the ruler of the ascendant. Let's look at another justice just to see if there is. This is another Supreme Court justice, William Rehnquist. Bam! Look at that. Jupiter on the ascendant. Is there a connection? Now he is the ruler of the ascendant now. Now, is there a connection between him and the ruler of the ninth? What is the ruler of the ninth is Sun. What's the Sun's next application? Sun's next application is to Jupiter, right? 6 degrees by sextile. Sun is in Libra, the scales. Where's the part of fortune? Part of fortune's in Scorpio with the moon. So also connection with the moon and Saturn. Right, so we had Moon in Aquarius, and Saturn was ruler of the ascendant in the last chart. Now we've got a connection between Moon and Saturn in the same sign, and now Saturn is ruler of the part of fortune. Is there a connection between? Okay, wait, what's the ninth from Scorpio is Cancer? Oh, bam! Right, so I was looking for the connection with the ninth from the part of fortune, or from the ninth from Scorpio rather. And that's the moon, but the ninth from the part of fortune is, oh, look at that, Virgo with the Mercury there. Oh, look, another strong, we had another planet in Virgo. We've got Mercury in Virgo here in the ninth. And we've got the Venus. Look at this Venus-Mars opposition. Ooh, maybe this person kind of got themselves involved in some not quite Jupiterian fornication. Right, Jupiter-Mars. I mean, Venus-Mars tends to be scandalous. Venus-Mars opposition. Whew. Maybe there's a little off again, on again. Maybe this person had a secret kind of love for something that they enjoyed. It's Mars. It's Leo Aquarius, so it might not always be expressed sexually, but usually Venus-Mars is, especially the conjunction. But the Venus-Mars opposition, that's interesting. Next thing she's doing too. What does it rule? The 12th. And the 6th, and the 10th, and the 11th, and the 4th and the 5th. Yeah, there's something that this guy liked that, something he liked that he wasn't maybe. Look at that. This Venus-Mars is dispositing the moon. Yeah, something this person was into. Maybe they were trying to hold it at. Obviously, this person was good at creating, disciplining themselves and limiting it or restricting themselves, but there was something this person was really into that created internal tension, and that they probably did give into here and there, and it was probably something sexual in nature. Anyway, but so yes, we do have the signatures. Jupiter in the first, Jupiter with ninth house. We've got the Venus in the ninth, Venus approaching the ninth. We've got the Mercury in the ninth, exalted. So I think that definitely gives us a bit of an idea. Let's look at some clergy, right? Pope Francis. Okay, now here's an interesting thing. Jupiter is not necessarily in good shape in this chart. But look at that. But look at it. Jupiter is the ruler of the ninth of religion, right? The ninth is the house of religion. Now, I also used it as the house for law in the other two charts, but now we're using the ninth house as the house of religion. One of the things that I noticed, I remember learning when I was learning horary, was that if a priest comes to you and says, will I get the job, what house do you look at? You look at the cusp of the ninth. You don't look at the cusp of the 10th, because he's looking for a priesthood. He's not looking for a job as a clerk in some office, even though it might be a job at an office in the diocese, right? There are priests doing those kinds of jobs, but it still would be a sinecure. It would be an office for a priest, and so it would be the ninth house. So notice that Jupiter, the ruler of the ninth, is within 7 degrees of the descendant. But also notice that there is a mutual reception between Jupiter and the Saturn. And also notice that, remember, when we're always looking at what's going on with Saturn, with Moon and Mercury, because they represent the soul. Also notice how the Jupiter-Saturn is connected with the Moon and with the Mercury. So this Jupiter-Saturn, this 7th house, 9th house, others, religion and others, or religion, there's obviously something, and look at how Mercury is with the Jupiter, or Mercury's on the cusp of the on the cusp of the, and if I'm not mistaken, this guy was a scientist. He wasn't a lawyer, but he was a scientist. So that's, I think he was a biologist or something like that. But he was and isn't he the first Jesuit? He's also the first Jesuit pope, and maybe ever, I think. But yes, he was a Jesuit. Anyway, but so notice the Mercury there. So Mercury is, of course, science, knowledge. Ninth house is knowledge, right? And so we've got this Mercury, this Jupiter together. Interesting, once again, that we've got the Saturn in Pisces. So the Saturn is in Pisces that can't be, what's the word I'm looking for? Did I not? Do I need to expand it? It's only by detriment. Actually, what we would say is that Jupiter is pushing nature. Pushing nature, pushing power, pushing nature. Jupiter is pushing nature at Saturn, is what we would say. Jupiter and Mercury both are, right? Because it's a mutual reception, but Saturn gets his domicile. Matter of fact, it's both by domicile. Saturn, they both get domicile. Even though Jupiter's in detriment, Saturn gets domicile. They both get domicile from this mutual reception. So it on some level it works to Saturn's benefit more strongly than it works to Jupiter's. But Jupiter does get his own back, right? Because he's already in a detrimented situation. Whereas in Mercury's case, Mercury is just pushing nature, right? Mercury is just applying to Saturn from Saturn's sign. Jupiter is applying to Saturn from his sign. Well, he's not really applying. So first of all, they're not applying. They really are just in mutual reception by sign, right? So they're not really in moiety. They're not able to really be in connection to each other yet. But the Mercury and the Saturn are. So we've got the connection with Saturn and the 7th house thing. And interesting, we're talking about someone who never married, right? So interesting, we've got all this 7th house stuff connected to it, connected here, but it doesn't have anything to do with marriage. And notice also that Venus is the ruler of the part of fortune. So let's look at the ruler of the, let's find the lot of Jupiter, the lot of victory in this particular chart. So this is very different. Look at also how the sun, which represents religion, is in Jupiter's sign, is in Sagittarius. Then let's look what the first triplicity ruler of the ninth house is. I think that's the first triplicity ruler is journeys. The second triplicity ruler is faith and religion. So second triplicity ruler would be, is it nighttime? Would be Venus. So this, look at this Venus moon. So Venus is the ruler of the the part of fortune. Venus is with the moon here. So it's interesting. Would we think that this, I mean, if we were just to look at it, I mean, would I think, oh, this person's a painter or something like that? I mean, with moon and Venus, see, once again, in Aquarius, look, notice how we've got, remember how I'm talking about how I'm always attracted to these charts that have similar things? We've got moon in Aquarius again, right? Clarence Thomas had moon in Aquarius. So does he. Isn't Mars the nighttime triplicity ruler for Mars, for water signs? I use Venus and Mars. I don't use him for both. So Rob Hand was the one who started doing that. Or actually, it started before that. It started, I think, maybe by Lily's time they were using, maybe even by Scherner's time, they were using Mars for both nighttime and daytime. I don't do that. I use Venus for day and Mars for night. So, and see, a perfect example for why. If we're going to be splitting things into triplicity rulers per house, why would I use Mars for both? Right? I'd want Venus then. So once I kind of got into using triplicity rulers to figure out different issues related to houses, I no longer wanted to just use Mars. It never really fit for me. It never really worked for me, even when I was doing it. Notice a few interesting things here. Notice how the ruler of the part of fortune is 10 houses away from the part of fortune. So it's culminating. And then notice that this Jupiter stuff then now moves to the ninth house from the part of fortune. Jupiter is the ruler of the ninth. See, now we have Jupiter, the ruler of the ninth house, in mutual reception to Saturn, the ruler of the ninth from the part of fortune. So definitely looks like there's some kind of, there definitely looks like a pious chart, and maybe even maybe more rigidly legalistic than pious. You know, this guy comes off as very pious, but or no, I'm not saying that he isn't pious. He doesn't have a strong or true belief. What I'm saying though is that this type of person, the type of person this chart belongs to, would come from a very naturally conservative bent, would find it naturally easy to what's the word I'm looking for? To relinquish certain things, to not do things that don't seem to be right. There'd be a strong sense of right and wrong. There'd be a strong self-criticism. There'd be a lot of seriousness. There'd be very, very serious, this person. There'd be a love for beauty and things of that nature, probably, but still a very strong seriousness, and a sobriety and seriousness that this person would have. So it would make it very easy for this person to kind of, in my opinion, even though the Jupiter is fallen, right? So the Jupiter is fallen, but because of the mutual reception by sign, not just by sign, it makes it easy for the Saturn to take the Jupiter under its wing and to keep it on the straight and narrow, right? So so the Saturn wouldn't let the Jupiter fall. The Saturn will not let the Jupiter fall. The Saturn will keep the Jupiter in good stead. So, and Jupiter rules the Rahu in this chart. And notice how the Rahu is right with the Sun. Sun is the planet representing religion, right? So Jupiter represents religion by house, Sun by natural signification. Okay. Welcome, Layla. Good to see you always. We pretty much finished the presentation part, and we're just kind of looking at the charts now.
Works for me. It's
Good.
fun.
So actually, what we can do before we start with this, Layla Akbar, do you want to give her a little update of what you think, or kind of we're going to do what we usually do at the end, which is, oh, what did you get from today, or what did you learn from today? So what did you kind of get from, what have you gotten so far from today to kind of bring Layla in?
Well, the important part, I mean, we really discussed all of the things that Jupiter signified, but the really important thing that we did was the Lord of Victory, and to see how its significations can really add to more interpretations of the chart.
Oh, and we didn't,
Super cool.
and we didn't do that in Francis's chart yet. But tell her some of the things that we learned about Jupiter, Layla. So what are some of the things? What are some of the things that we like? One of the things we talked about is how we use this term expansion for Jupiter now, but we didn't see that term. Talk to her about that a little bit.
Yeah, we did not see that until did you mention 18th or 17th or 18th century, or maybe 19th?
17th.
We did not see that. Yeah, 17th. We did not see that until that.
So what we
Interesting.
What did we see instead?
We saw, I forgot that word.
Piety.
Piety. Yeah, it says, I always thought it had to do with religion, but I thought you said, Garth, yourself, or Antoine, sorry, that that's not the case.
What's that? Does it have to do with what?
Like Jupiter doesn't have to do with religion. Is that true? But it does have to do with piety?
We talked about this. Well, it has to do, so remember, okay, so this is what we distinguished, was that when we go to church, so religion itself is the sun, and the church itself is the sun. One of the things that we just saw was that Jupiter's favorite place is by the altar in a church.
Yeah.
So it's by the altar. It's not the church itself. His favorite place is by the altar. So what we realized was that when we go to church, so when we put on our best clothes, we go to church, we give our tithes, we do everyththing right, we come home and we do all the right things. That's Jupiter. Jupiter is based
morality.
Yes, Jupiter is the pillar of society. Jupiter is the good parishioner.
Yeah, and the Good Samaritan too.
Good Samaritan, right? So so basically, because what we realized, what I was saying was that, what is religion for? Religion is to basically bring us to our highest good, and Jupiter as the benefic is the highest good. So in that era, when the highest good was expressed through religion, your highest good was expressed through piety and true faith and obedience to the law. So that when we as parishioners, or when we as mosque goers or temple goers go to the church, go to the mosque or temple or church, we're embodying Jupiter. So we're going into how the sun turns us into Jupiter. The sun says, this is the light of wisdom, absorb it. And then we say, oh, based on that law of Jupiter, light of wisdom, I will make the following judgments and decisions, and my behavior will be affected thusly. Because one of the things that we realized with him was judgment, was so that Jupiter really is basically higher mental functions. It's
that's why lawyers are Jupiter. Yeah, because they judge all the time.
Litigators. So we were just talking about that.
Yeah.
So not the litigator,
totally.
But the tax lawyer is just, and all judges are just. So we were just looking at Clarence Thomas and William Rehnquist. So we were just looking at Supreme Court justices, and both of them had.
Clarence Thomas shows that he's crazy, like kind of creepy too.
That's an interesting. Well, let's come back to that one. It showed that the wife was in charge.
Oh, and that is true. Okay, so fair enough.
His wife was definitely in charge, definitely. Okay, so we didn't look at the lot of victory for Pope Francis. So let's see if we can find his. So you find the lot of victory by taking the part of spirit to Jupiter by day. It's a nighttime chart, and then Jupiter to the part of spirit by night. So we have to find the part of spirit first. So it's nighttime, so we take the sun to the moon. So that would be forward 60 minus 13. Forward 60, 11 minus 13, so that gives us 28 degrees of Leo. So, oh, another victory at the end of Leo. So 28 degrees of Leo for Pope Francis for the part of spirit. Okay, so we take Jupiter to the part of spirit. So back here to 120 is 4 degrees, and then back another, what did we say, 28? Back another 6 degrees or something like that. Okay, I think that's right. Back 28. So back 120 is to 4. It was at 28, back 6. Okay, great. So back 120 is 11 degrees of Pisces, and back another 6 is 5 degrees of Pisces. So that ninth house, that whole sign ninth, is the lot of victory, which makes perfect sense. And the Saturn is on it. And once again, the Saturn and the Jupiter are connected through that mutual reception. So it makes perfect sense. Okay, so now let's move on to John Paul II. Okay, so John Paul II is one of the longer papacies. So he was from what, 79 until 2004 or 5 or something like that, or 2002 or 3. So a long time. And one of the more regressive papacies, Iron Fist. He basically tried to close the door on all of the things all of the advances that happened as a result of Vatican II in the 60s. So let's see what's going on with him. First of all, where's Jupiter? Well, first of all, Jupiter is in Leo. Leo is ruled by the sun, right? Sun is religion. So there's Jupiter in the midheaven, and Jupiter Neptune. So this person had a very had a kind of a messianic delusion. There's a delusion related to this Jupiter aspect. Is there a connection between the Jupiter and the ruler of the ascendant, or the ruler of the ninth? The ruler of the ascendant is Venus.
Is Venus, so it's.
And there's a square between them. Ruler of the ninth is the moon. Okay, so there's no the moon is applying to the sextile. And the ruler of the part of fortune is Mars. And Mars is moving backwards, not quite close enough. Really, moon is applying to the Saturn. Venus,
it's basically on the ascendant. I mean, what do you make of that?
On the ascendant, right? Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, definitely. And
it's not like in a good situation, like retrograde, Libra.
Yeah, exactly. And so this is the part of, so that's interesting that this person with that part of fortune, right? But what did I say about him? He took the church backwards. He took the church backwards. That's basically what he did. He took the church back into the Middle Ages. Yeah, John Paul did a lot of fucked up shit. John Paul, in some circles, John Paul II is called the patron because he was just beatified and made a saint. He's called the patron saint of pedophiles because he had many high-level pedophiles really close to him that were never sanctioned because they were such good fundraisers. There's a man by the name of Maciel, and there's another guy. There are 2 or 3 guys: Dan Murphy, Maciel, and there's 1 or 2 other people that were close to him, and that were especially Maciel, who from the 40s until the 80s or 90s was molesting all of the people under his charge. It turned out that he had children by 2 other women. At the very end of his life, he refused all last rites. It turned out that he didn't believe in it at all. He was a great fundraiser. He was embezzling funds. doing drugs. I mean, just crazy. But Marcial is the one that basically brought JP2 to Mexico. So, and I think it was 90 something, 94 or 5. JP2 came to Mexico, and it was the Legionnaires, Legion of Christ, and Marcial who brought him to Mexico. So this Mars Libra retrograde might be showing some of the negative, some of the bad decisions that this person made, right? It'd be in the 12th. It would be in the 12th from the fortune. So it could be showing some of the self-undoings that he may have done. Because definitely, he definitely kind of laid waste to the church. See, right after Vatican II, everything was a lot more open. They'd stopped doing Latin. They were doing now masses in the vernacular. They'd kind of stopped a lot of what was alienating about it. And but on the moral side, especially, JP2 brought it backwards, brought everything backwards, shut the door on anything having to do with contraception or abortion or homosexuality or whatever, or any of that. And he's the one, of course, who is responsible for for basically keeping all of the sexual abuse things in house, but criminalizing homosexuality and pointing the finger at homosexuality. I mean, just all of this stuff. So this Mars in the 12th from the part of fortune, retrograde and in detriment, definitely shows. And the moon, and also moon Saturn. So once again, this connection with moon and Saturn, we've been seeing, it would be easy for people with moon and Saturn to restrict themselves. And he was especially restrictive about what you were believing in theology. He was especially, that's where he used the guy who was after him, Ratzinger, who was Benedict XVI. That's where he used that guy Ratzinger to basically stop any kind of progressive thinking. So this person is especially regressive as far as thinking is concerned. Right, we would see that with the with the moon, Saturn, the ideas would be restrictive, right? And the moon is the ruler of the 9th. So that's representing. Now, what's interesting is usually what we tend to see is the ruler of the 9th and the 10th, or the ruler of the 10th and the 9th, or the ruler of the 9th and 10th together when we see Pope's charts. In this case, we have the ruler of the 9th, and well, the ruler of the 10th and 9th have just left each other. So it's just left the new moon in this particular case. So I wouldn't necessarily say they're conjunct, but there is a new moon. The moon is moving out of, so remember, this is one of those places where I do recognize the combustion. So notice that the moon is combusted, the ruler of the 9th is combusted by the 10th.
Wait, so how is that? How can an out of sign aspect not be possible, but combustion is possible out of sign?
In my opinion, because of distance. I mean, ultimately, if you want to call it a conjunction, you can. I'm not going to read it as one. But
I'm just confused by the underlying like theory behind that. Like I get like the rule, and I'm happy to just follow it, but it doesn't. It's a little confusing.
Well, the theory, in my opinion, the theory behind it is that there's an imaginary wall between each sign, and so unless a planet is applying to a sign to another planet that's right there at the beginning, then what I do in my sign, what I'm doing in my house, and what think of it as row houses. Okay, so you live in a series of row houses, and I live in the Taurus row house, and your bedroom is right next to my kitchen. So I can sometimes hear what's going on in your bedroom. You can sometimes hear me eating, or maybe I've got a stereo on the wall next to the kitchen table, right? And you can hear the music. But that doesn't mean we leave for work at the same time every day. That doesn't mean that you and I are working for the same thing. That means that you and I are really, really close, in proximity. We can feel each other and hear each other. We have a lot of knowledge about what's going on with each other. We're in each other's space, but we're not working together. That's how I look at it.
Interesting. Cool.
That's how I look at it. Now, the thing is, someone else is going to look at it totally different. People are using it. If you feel more comfortable using it, the problem for me is I don't like the ambiguity of reading it. Right? I don't like reading out of signs, so I just don't do it.
Yeah, fair enough.
Right? Simple as that. It's like I don't have to, it's like I don't have to have everything mean everything, because I don't like it, so I'm not going to use it. And ultimately, I don't find that things are missing generally, because what's really happening is this. This is what defines this person.
Yeah.
I mean,
and I wasn't saying like, let's see it as a conjunction. I more meant it the other way. Like, is it still combust if the signs are, if they aren't in this co-present in the same sign?
I think it is, because think about it, if my music is really loud.
Yeah, you can hear it.
You can still hear it. And you have to move to the other side of the house to not hear it.
Got it.
You have to move out of combustion. Or you have to
Also,
or you have to move to the neighbor's apartment next to yours to not hear it.
Antoine, also, this is just random and I won't take up any more of your time, but this guy's chart, the one you mentioned, I don't know if it's on the docket, but it has a AA rating. It's available. Martial.
Oh no, really?
Yeah, I just thought it was really interesting, the story you were telling, and it has a AA rodent if you wanted to pop it, if you wanted to look at it.
Oh my God, I'm gonna hold honest, I do, because he was a priest.
Yeah.
Okay, no, first of all, notice, the first thing I noticed is the part of fortune is in the 9th house, ruled by Mars. And then
Jupiter, Neptune again. Yeah.
Then also I noticed that Mercury is connected with Mars by being in his sign. What do we know about when Mercury is in Mars's sign, or when Mercury is with Mars?
A highway thief.
Highway thief, that's right. There can be lying, there can be criminality. Right? Mercury becomes Mars's soldier, right? So whatever Mars is working for, and what is one of the, and notice that Mars is down in the 4th house, right on the cusp of the 4th. What do we call the 4th house? What's one of the things we use for the 4th house?
The nadir.
But remember when we've talked about the house, it's the house of what?
It's the house of hidden things or secrets.
Yes, the house of secrets. The house of secrets, hidden things and secrets, right? And there Mars is the ruler of the 4th in the 4th. With
the greater
Rahu,
malefic too.
With Rahu. And notice that the moon is just at the end of it as well. Okay, so here's the Jupiter in the 1st house. Now, Maciel came from a well-to-do family, from a small town, where he was one of the big families, like big wealthy families in the area. And that's basically kind of how he made it, what his forte was, essentially fundraising with old wealthy women. And he flirt with them, and they think he even had sex with some of them in order to get money. But and notice the Venus in the 7th. And so first of all, we're dealing with a person who's got appetite problems, right? So
Jupiter, where are you seeing that?
What are the planets that represent appetite?
Oh, Venus and the moon.
That's right, Venus and the moon. So the moon is at 0 degrees of Sagittarius, applying to whom? First to Mercury, and then to Jupiter. So it looks like we've got kind of a wide grand trine here. Who rules the 5th house?
Jupiter.
Okay, and the 5th, and Jupiter is where?
In the 1st.
Who did we say are the appetite charts? Are the appetite planets?
Venus and Moon.
Venus.
Where is Venus?
In the 7th.
In the 7th. She's angular. So we're going back to now Bonatti and the 146 considerations. Remember what was the first thing we did? We looked to see who's in an angle. The very first thing we do is to look to see who's advancing. And the planets that are advancing in this chart are Venus, who is love and sex and desire and appetite. Mars, who is the ruler of secrets, also in the sign ruled by in Scorpio, which rules the what do we call the genitals, right? It rules the hidden things, right? So it rules the hidden parts of the body. And then Jupiter, the ruler of the 5th house and the ruler of the 8th. And notice that the sun is the ruler of in the 8th house. So there's a connection between the ruler of the ascendant and the ruler of the 8th. We don't call this mutual reception. We call it what? Do you remember? In each other's generosity, right? So moon, so the sun and Jupiter are in each other's generosity.
That means when they're in each other's signs of exaltation?
It's when they're in.
Oh, I guess.
It's when they're in each other's signs, but those signs don't aspect each other.
Got it.
Yeah, and the lot of fortune is in the 9th house. It's also ruled by Mars.
That's right, ruled by this Mars. And the ninth from the part of fortune is
9th from the part of fortune. 1, 2, 3, 4, 6, 7, 8, 9. It's
5th?
again Sagittarius.
And
Yep.
what's going on between Mars and Jupiter?
Yep.
Mars and Jupiter, that's the closest applying aspect in the chart.
Yeah.
So, but what do we
And
know?
Mars kind of wins, doesn't it?
Mars wins. What do we know about Jupiter, though? What do we know about Mars and Jupiter?
Well, in this chart, it's a day chart, right? So Jupiter is the greater benefic and Mars is out of sect malefic. So it's the most helpful planet and the least helpful in a square aspect.
Okay.
And the Mars has more essential dignity.
Except that I was looking for another thing.
Oh.
But that's great. No, that's good information. So what do we imply from that? What do we imply from the information you just gave me?
That's where I get confused. It would seem to me that there's some sort of struggle between what's represented by Jupiter and Mars, and that the Mars wins.
Okay. Okay, stay with that. But the thing that I was looking for is that Mars and Jupiter are enemies.
Yeah, they are.
And remember, I just talked about this. When we talk about Mars in the 9th house, what is one of the things that we talk about? What does Mars represent when we talk about the 9th house?
Like giving up your religion.
Descent.
I thought. Descent, yeah.
So in this case, what we have is we've got a very showy Jupiter, right? This Jupiter is showy, but this Jupiter has a secret, and the secrets win. You're right.
Yeah.
You were right. It's the secrets, right? Because it's Mars as the ruler of the 4th house of secrets. And see, he was sexually abused by an uncle, I think. And I think was a priest, or there was a really strong, he was kind of a sissy kid, and there was this really, really strong thing for machismo Mexican, and there was military in the family. There was the Mars. And he was raped. He was kind of repeatedly raped by an uncle for quite an extended period of his childhood, and then went on and did it with almost. I mean, this Legionnaires group, so repressive. He was so paranoid. There's the Mars and Scorpio. So repressive, so hierarchical. So only the best looking whitest looking Mexican Hispanics. From the best families. So very, very, so we can even see kind of the elitism of his Jupiterianness, and the fact that it was an army, it was a legion, it was done as an army. So we've got this whole Mars-Jupiter connection, right? The Mars is the expression, right? The Legionnaires were an army. The Mars is the expression of the religion. And here we have this Mars-Jupiter expression. And so we can see from the Jupiter that more than likely, like, okay, now with the Mars, with the ruler of the part of fortune being this Mars, it should be stronger, but not necessarily, because there's no reception between the Jupiter and the Mars, and the Mars is ruling the fourth of my secret, of this secret that I have. And on top of that, this Venus is angular. So this person is looking for some way to, is looking through other people to fulfill desire, right? They're looking to fulfill their desire through others.
In unconventional ways.
And why do you say unconventional? Because it's Aquarius?
Yeah.
Okay.
I know it's like more modern in Turk, but I find it actually plays out like
Well,
non-traditional.
or-
Like I know a lot of like polyamorous people, or people who straight up like take advantage in a sexual situation.
I was going to say that.
Yeah.
I was going to say more that, more my way or the highway kind of way. I have Venus in Aquarius. But you're right. It can be based on kind of unconventional. It can certainly be based on unconventional, but usually it's also they do by their own beliefs and nobody else's.
Totally. I mean, that's Aquarius.
Right. So by their own, so
Don't.
that's the big air aspect of it, is that they've created a belief about it, and that's how they operate. In this case, excuse me, we can see that. And notice how Saturn is in the fall of Venus.
Yeah, I think Saturn and Virgo is in one of the last charts too.
Oh,
I don't know if I probably just a coincidence.
Well, because they're, I think, born around the same.
Yeah, exactly. That's yeah.
But we can see, we can see the military background. We can see how the military coloring of the religion. Not yet. We haven't done a lot of victory yet. Let's look for it. Okay, so part of spirit. It's daytime, so we go moon to sun. So it's 90 plus 20. 90 plus 20, 27 degrees or 28 degrees of Scorpio. So that's the spirit. So notice, Mars rules the spirit and the fortune in this chart. That's important. Okay, now we're going to, it's daytime, so we're going to go spirit to Jupiter. So it's back 90, was it 28? Back 90 and back 19. Back 90 brings us to 8. Back another 10 brings us to 28. And back another 9 brings us to 19. 19 degrees of Aries. Mars,
right next
again.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So now Mars rules the victory, Mars rules the spirit, Mars rules the fortune. Everything. Mars rules everything in this chart. Everything of importance in relation to Jupiterian things in this chart.
So Antoine, we want typically like essential dignity for a planet like Mars in this situation. Like it's a good thing for it to be in domicile, right? Or are there situations where giving like the out of sect malefic like greater power, like having it be in its sign of domicile could indicate something bad? I don't know if I'm asking this question correctly.
I don't think there's an incorrect way to ask it, to be honest. To be honest with you, this whole thing about out of sect malefic and it's daytime, so Mars is the most difficult malefic. I think Chris Brennan is the creator of that, or is
pretty new.
It's new. It's not something used. And to be honest with you, I've never really seen. It's a detail to worry over, without necessarily something that gives results.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not trying to freak out about it. It's a good point, but I don't think he was the first to. He was the one who popularized it, but I'm pretty sure it was in one of Dyke's translations.
It's implied in looking at things from a perspective of sect.
Yeah.
However, I'm not one that necessarily thinks sect is that super important.
Big important. Got it. Fair enough.
I mean, I think it's a minor dignity. It has I think that it's up for grabs. When we first talked about sect and everything, it looked like it's something that needs more research. What I see more is
Yeah.
people adopting things and not researching things. What I will say to you is, yes, it should, Mars is here. He's in his own sign. He's angular. He's in his own sign. Shouldn't he be acting well? And he rules.
Like, shouldn't good things be happening?
Yeah,
Yeah, that was kind of more my question.
good
Like,
things,
sect aside.
good things
Yeah.
did happen. Good things did happen. He got.
Oh, I guess from his point of view, yeah, for him, not for other people. Mhm.
For 5 centuries, he got over on people. Not only did he
Yeah.
get over, he became one of the most important. He got to sit at the right hand of the Pope.
Totally.
Good things did happen. He just did them badly. He just fucked up. He just himself fucked up. So, hey, remember we were talking about how the 10th house is not just your professional reputation, it's your public reputation. So let's say I was a virgin in high school, but I have a reputation as a slut. That's 10th house. That's the difference between the first house and the 10th house. The first house is the virgin, the 10th house is the slut. Right? And so looking at the 10th house, we can see what the person became known for. Right? The works by which they're known. And look at how we've got K2 there. There's going to be something that goes awry, and it's in a Venus sign. So the Venus thing is what we're going to know them for. Not the, so it's not going to be it's not going to be how well things went. Ultimately, it's not for how he got to sit next to the Pope on a private jet to Mexico, on a Mexico trip that he himself planned out.
No, it's for diseases of Venus, or not as STDs, but like the sexual crap he pulled, right? Like
Right.
that's, yeah.
Right. It's for not just having children with 2 different women, but sexually molesting them too. Being a drug addict, stealing money, Mercury in a Mars sign on the part of fortune in the 9th.
Got it. So the 10th shows what he was known for later on. And you're saying the first shows, in contrast, what? Like just who he is?
Who they are, who you are.
Who the person is. Okay. Versus what they're known for. Got it.
The 10th, the first, I mean, the thing is, inside it should be the inclination to fuck up should be inherent in the first house. Right?
Yeah.
It should be inherent. And what do we see? The ruler of what house is on the cusp of the first, is in the first house, right on the ascendant.
Yeah.
Which 5th house and 8th house. So already we know
5th
that
and 8th.
this person is inclined towards what? 5th house. What's 5th house mean?
Like excess, pleasure, like
the excess comes from it being who? Jupiter.
Jupiter. Yeah.
Right? So, and we also know that this person loves luxury because Sun loves gold and things that are expensive and luxuries. So this person there should be an enjoyment of luxury and an excess of love for luxury. And so and then an excess love for enjoyment. Who's the second triplicity ruler of the 5th house? So it's fire.
Oh God.
It's Sun. So who are the 3 triplicity rulers for fire? Sun, Jupiter.
Sun, Jupiter, and Saturn.
Okay, so who's the second triplicity ruler representing
Jupiter?
And that represents sensual amusements and pleasure. So already the sensual amusements and pleasures is right there on the ascendant. So that's the inclination. The person's already inclined. So they're already inclined towards pleasure, and there's the 10th house that says, ooh, it's some Venusian thing that this person might get known for. Now that could mean, harmony and peace and, diplomacy and things of that nature, but we've got K2 here. And we've got Venus on the bends of the 2. We've got Mars with Rahu. We've got K2 up there. See, Mars with Rahu, because see, when you said the Venus representing the unconventional, it's really Rahu who's unconventional. These are unconventional secrets. And And Rahu's called the agent.
Or you could say too, their family, like their secrets that are generational. One could argue, like, if he hadn't been molested,
Yeah,
he
so-
wouldn't have molested anyone.
Absolutely, and whatever other kinds of abuse for not being manly enough, which he passed on
Yeah.
as well, making a totally
Yeah.
hyper masculine legionnaires. The legionnaires were totally hyper masculine, and so so much interesting stuff in this chart. And also we still have a moon Saturn connection. It's closer.
Oh yeah.
Moon Mercury is closer, but we've got a moon Saturn connection.
That is nuts.
Isn't it? Right. So I mean, if we go back to Pope John II, his inclination is different. So what this person is going to be known for is rulership, right? The throne, being public. Remember that Pope John Paul II was the most PR'd pope in history. He was the first pope to become a world famous celebrity. Sun. So that's something to think of. That's something to look at a little bit different. We look at things a little bit differently then.
There's the same placements the other guy, Martial, has on his ascendant. This is like really interesting.
Yeah, 1920. They're both born in 1920.
Yeah, but it's like, what you become known for?
Yeah,
versus, I don't know.
Maciel's issue, right? There is Maciel's issue right there. That's a very interesting point. Fantastic point. This person is much better at closing off ideas that don't make sense to them. You know, closing off the stream of information so that they only restricting themselves by restricting their knowledge. This person's knowledge restricts their knowledge, and that was what he was the most obsessed with, was restricting the way that Catholicism was being kind of disseminated, the theology specifically. He was the most I mean, draconian about it, and so I find that's really interesting. But this pope was the celebrity pope. And sure enough, we've got that sun. Let's see about we're kind of looking for Francis in the same way. So Taurus. Now this makes sense because this Pope has been seen as kind of an ameliorator, trying to balance and harmonize the tradition with the new world, right? And to try to show a more compassionate way of looking at things. And note that the Jupiter is trining the 10, the midheaven, and the Venus is squaring widely with squaring. Right, so this person is trying to bring some kind of balance, trying to bring a more loving hand to it. Now it's interesting. It's not we're not seeing issues and problems like when we saw that K2, which kind of pointed to, ooh, something might be up. We've got this Uranus, right? So that could also be him not expecting to become Pope and kind of being suddenly elevated, right?
Is that what happened? Like he
not necessarily. He was second in line to become Pope when Ratzinger became Pope. So Ratzinger was, I think, elected in 2002. And he was second. He was the person that got the second most votes. So so he's always been a company man, always been reliable. He's been if they're made a cardinal, then that means the Pope believes that they're reliable. If you're made a cardinal, then you become what they call papabile. You become popeable. You become able to become a pope.
Because that's like the next one down from Pope is Cardinal.
Right, exactly. That's the next one down. So when you're made a cardinal, you're basically saying, okay, you're down with the company. You haven't, we either hidden all your bullshit or you haven't done enough bullshit that we need to be worried. You're gonna spout the company line. You're not gonna go off into radical fairyland. And we know you can be. We know that you're papabile, and so sure enough, Francis is Papabile, and he is expressing kind of trying to find balance, a more compassionate and balanced viewpoint, which also makes sense with the Venus moon in Aquarius. Hey, didn't we have Venus in Aquarius for
Yeah,
yeah,
in the seventh too, but just not with the ruler of the ascendant, the moon next to it. Yeah, but look, he has it.
yeah,
He does too.
yeah. Okay, so so that I thought that would be. Let's see. Do I have anybody else interesting? I didn't have a shitload of people today. Oh, Samuel Adams, who was one of the founding fathers and one of the philosophical foundations of the United States. And so I thought I'd see if there's a Jupiter element and or ninth house element with this chart. Note that the ruler of the ninth is on the cusp of the midheaven. And note that Sagittarius is rising. And Jupiter is there. And Jupiter is sextile. And it's a separating sextile between the sun and Jupiter, which sun is ruler of the ninth.
Well, Antoine, sorry to like ask you a question about an old chart, but the last Pope we looked at, I think it was Francis, the current one, his Jupiter is not really in great shape. The other ones, even if they didn't have like sign-based dignity, were at least angular. This guy was like in the sixth, and in what, fall? Capricorn's not a good sign for Jupiter. What do you make of that?
Well, remember we talked about the mutual reception.
Okay, got it. Yeah, that actually is helpful. Sorry, thank you.
That's the point. That's the point.
Yep.
Otherwise, you're right.
Forgot about.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Otherwise you're right. It shouldn't necessarily, but because of the mutual reception between it shows the piety, the restrictive. Once again, the Saturn won't allow it to fall. Is the point that I was kind of making about that. Okay, who are we talking about? Sam Adams.
Sam Adams.
So I'm trying to see what they said about Samuel Adams. I think he wrote like Confederation Papers or something like that. Hold on a second. One of the founding fathers of the United States, he was instrumental in garnering the support of the colonies for rebellion against Great Britain, eventually resulting in the American Revolution, and was also one of the key architects of the principles of American republicanism that shaped American political culture. After attending Boston Latin School and Harvard College, he became a mercantile businessman, so not a lawyer, then an influential political writer and theorist. Argued that the colonies should withdraw from Great Britain and form a new government. He played a prominent role during protests against the Stamp Act and in the events of the Boston Tea Party in 1773. Furthermore, he participated in the Continental Congress and advocated the adoption of the Declaration of Independence at the Second Continental Congress. Okay. So instrumental in the conceptualization of this new country and the philosophy. So philosophers belong to the ninth house, but they also represent Jupiter. Once again, we've got that Jupiter-Sun connection. Moon is the ruler of the part of fortune. Where is that? The moon is exalted in Taurus.
Exaltation, yeah.
Opposing the Venus. Venus is the ruler of the 10th. So we've got this connection with Venus, the ruler of the 10th. Now, remember that Libra is justice, right? It's the scales of justice. And so it implies the law as well, even though this person was a business person, which is Mercury, right? He was a mercantilist, right? Mercantil is M-E-R-C, like Mercury. So this person was a business person. And the rabble-rouser, right? We've got this Mars-Mercury. And so this person used the Mars-Mercury to foment rebellion, right? And so it looks like the philosophy might have to do with rebellion or fighting against something in an unlawful manner, right? So the Boston Tea Party, that Stamp Act, basically everything they did at the Boston Tea Party was against the law. They threw all the tea into the they didn't want to pay the tax on the tea, So they threw all the tea into the ocean. They basically got rid of it in an unlawful manner. So Samuel Adams was an agitator to unlawful actions. And note how then there's also that connection between Mars and Saturn, who's on the cusp of the ascendant, right? So, and Saturn is government, right? Saturn is government, things under the ground and on top of the ground. Mars is the ruler of the fourth, so the fourth is country.
Yeah, and it's so funny that it's happening in its 10th house and he became known for it.
He became known for rabble rousing. He was known for inciting rebellion. Known for inciting rebellion against the British. Isn't that interesting? So once again, and note also the ruler of the 10th is in Scorpio in a Mars sign, right? So
Yep.
they're going to be known for dissent, not for harmony, but not necessarily harmony. And it's in the aesthetic, it's in the sign of in the air Venus. So
Venus, yeah.
right, we would be writing about it. There would be ideas about this. And so it'd be ideas about dissent.
And this is reception by they're in each other's generosity, right?
Yes, they are. Yes, they
Yeah.
are. So 10th and 11th. Really 11th, 10th, 11th, or 11th and 12th, but 10th and 11th by this one.
Yeah.
Right. So, and the sobriety of the person, this probably represented some kind of good judgment because the ruler financially, because the ruler of the second is on the first, and then we've got the ruler of the part of fortune exalted, and then the fifth. so this is an interesting chart. Okay.
Yeah,
So,
really interesting.
oh wait, let's look at that. The part of what was it? The part of victory.
Lot of victory, yeah.
Okay. So spirit first. It's daytime, so moon to sun. So it's 150 minus 6. 4 to 160, we got 150 minus 6 is 10 degrees of Taurus. Right on. Wow, 10 degrees of Taurus. Right on the moon. The part
There's a lot of victory.
no, the part of spirit, even more.
Part of spirit.
Part of spirit.
Yeah.
So that also means that the part of fortune is on the part of spirit. So that's usually quite important. So part of spirit, and also that means that the part of fortune and part of spirit are in opposition to each other. That's interesting. And note how the part of spirit is this Venus in Scorpio. So she's the one fomenting the rebellion. That's interesting. Let's move on. So we're going to, so from part of spirit, which is at 10 degrees of Taurus, moving to Jupiter. It's daytime, yes, okay. So 210 minus 8. 210 minus 8, 8 degrees of Cancer. So bringing us back to the moon. So the moon,
Which is exactly where the, yeah.
bring us back to the moon. So that's where the victory is with this exalted moon, who rules what? 8th house, rules the 8th house. So that's also, I wonder if there's an inheritance of some sort.
There was, I like skimmed his page as we started talking. One of the rebellions he set up had to do with like how people were compensated. It had to do with like other people's money. And I was like, oh, 8th house.
8th house, there we go.
Yeah.
How other people were compensated based on the work they did or things of that nature.
Yeah, he was like, he's something about like it not being fair, something to do with fairness, compensation.
Oh, interesting. Okay, so Jupiter is fairness, right? We've already
Yeah.
with that aspect. And so we see this kind of, even though Jupiter isn't near the ascendant, he rules the ascendant and he rules the planet who is on it. Right.
He's
so
3 degrees off. I would say he's in the 1st house. Oh, Saturn is, sorry, not Jupiter. Yes, yes, sorry.
Yeah, Saturn
is far away.
Not much in the first. Yeah, definitely. And Jupiter was the whole side first, right?
Yeah, yes, exactly.
But ultimately, what we have happen here is Jupiter influencing the first influencing everything in the first. So that this is a severe person. This person is kind of severe and easily heated up, right? We were just talking about, you got this Mercury in the 10th. If he's with Mars, this is going to heat that Mercury up. And look, we've got the Sun and Mars with Mercury. This is a very heated up Mercury. Right?
And Uranus.
Right.
Like some weird shit could happen. And it did. They dumped a bunch of tea into the harbor. Like,
well, and unconventional ideas, right? Because Mercury is thinking, right? So unconventional. So Sun and Mars, this person's hot-headed. He's using his writing talent to vent his frustrations and his anger, right? Because there's the cholera, so it has to come out through cholera. The Mercury has to come out through cholera. And then the Uranus is expressing ideas that haven't been expressed yet, or looking at a country, at the organization of a country in a way that hasn't been organized yet. So I think it makes perfect sense. Excellent. All right, so that is